Steve says, I'm looking for a way to give my bike that custom edge with some carbon tie bolts. What are your thoughts and suggestions? For many people, their bike becomes an extension of themselves and an expression of their personality. But once you have all the components and everything you want on your bike, what else is there to do to really make it yours? The ultimate sign of a dedicated cyclist is replacing stock bolts with custom fasteners. Add some subtle color accents with anodized alloy bolts and claim the weight weenie crown once and for all by swapping steel bolts for titanium. I like carbon tie brand bolts for their great color selection and their quality. Not only do the colored alloy carbon tie bolts provide a custom look, but they will also save you a little weight. Titanium bolts weigh even less. Keep in mind, we're talking about several grams per bolt, but it's usually more about aesthetics and bragging rights anyways. With these custom fasteners, there's more to it than just swapping the bolts. Titanium and alloy bolts have a lower torque spec on them than a steel bolt, and you must use a tie prep anti-seize compound on the threads of titanium bolts. This tie prep anti-seize compound will keep the bolts from cold welding, galling, or seizing upon metal-to-metal contact. Anyone who has had this happen to them knows that it is an absolute nightmare to get the old bolt out and usually results in a damaged bolt at minimum. Alloy bolts will benefit from applying blue Loctite or a light all-purpose grease like Dumontex MR grease to the threads. A good rule of thumb is to observe what's on the bolt you're removing and apply that same treatment to the new bolt. Tie bolts always get a tie prep anti-seize compound. Appropriate titanium bolts can be used on brake calipers, stems, seat post clamps, and disc brake rotors, but always check the torque specs of the component and that bolt. Alloy bolts are good for things like bottle cage bolts, derailleur clamps, derailleur tension and adjusting screws, disc brake lever mounting bolts, and most cable clamping bolts. One thing to be wary of is the tendency for alloy bolts to round out in the head at the tool-bolt interface. Swapping the bolts is pretty simple. Just measure the old bolt and then select a bolt of the same length or as close as possible. If you have to use a bolt a little longer than the one you removed, make sure that the threads aren't going to bottom out before the bolt gets tight. Prep the threads by applying the anti-seize compound or appropriate treatment, apply any necessary washers, and install the bolt. After the bolt is torqued correctly, you're done. Now take a step back and admire the little additions of color and customization you've added to your machine. Point them out on your next group ride or simply sit back and wait for someone to notice and admire them for themselves. Either way, it's sure to get people talking. If you want your question asked on Ask a Mechanic presented by Cyclery, send your inquiry to webletters@competitorgroup.com.